But if you flip these around, you can actually use the anxiety itself, the signal, the feeling you have, as where to place your attention that's in the present moment. And then you can willingly open up to engage that. And then especially you can try to shift to, how could this moment of me embracing the feeling be an expression of love? If this moment could be a gift, like the growth I have in this moment, the peace and clarity that eventually I'll have, to whom could I offer this moment with love?
Before we get started, if you enjoy these episodes, you might want to check out more at OptimalWork.com. Our website offers unique content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond. We have an in-depth masterclass covering our entire theory of growth, daily recommendations for personalized advice, and a platform to help groups and organizations learn and practice optimal work together. You can get a free trial at OptimalWork.com. Now let's start the episode. Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the OptimalWork podcast, joined by Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, good to be here with you again.
Hey, Sharif, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. We had to, continue this series, and last week we introduced some pretty big concepts. So I thought, it'd be great for us to follow up and unpack some of that more for people. And I thought, maybe the central theme is giving people confidence as they're growing, because I think one thing a lot of people experience is, as they're making progress, as they're making resolutions, as they're setting goals, they always, deal with setbacks, or they don't feel as good. At some point they feel great, and then other points they don't feel good, and they're kind of wondering, okay, am I really making progress? So I'd love to maybe apply some of the new concepts to that question. How do we give people confidence that they're really making progress?
Yeah, that's the best use of this material, I think. So, and the kind of things we'll be outlining here, in some ways, they show people the different ways you can be practicing doing the real move of vitality in different settings. But I think we'll see that it also maps, how do people generally get better? So, I look forward to getting into, the kind of the sense that there's kind of a terrain to human behavior, and that has, dark valleys in it, namely 3, anxiety, depression, addiction, which can be mixed too. But that's the general idea, and so there's these dark valleys, but then there's also this vital valley, and people can live there. The idea of calling these attractors is that there are ways of acting that produce something almost magnetic about them. It's like a momentum that generates. The more you do it, the more you want to do it, the easier it is to do it. And you get pulled into a certain way of acting. And so we often in OptimalWork have talked about virtuous cycles and vicious cycles. That's another way of describing. But I think that maybe this new wave of putting it will just make it easier for people to see what power they actually have to produce change, so that they don't get discouraged.
Yeah. So, I know one of the reasons why you got interested in exploring, looking into chaos theory, one of the reasons why it came up was because it has this non-linearity, which maybe doesn't mean that much to people who aren't into math or whatever, but just that progress is not just a fixed line, like you go in one straight direction, but there's curves, it changes, it bends, and that's one of the features of people's growth, right?
That's right. And that behaviors have real momentum, and yet people, one of the things that attracted me to right away is that one thing that you do in a moment, like say with vitality, you try to put as much love as you can into embracing a present challenge in its entirety. There's this complete embracing of it. Okay, now that has love, which is the meaning engine. It has willingness, which is the embracing the difficulty. And it has attention, which is the present challenge, the present moment. That can describe a way of living in a moment. It can describe how you close a door with care when someone is sleeping. So the smallest action can contain the whole model, but then it can describe a whole hours of work. So you did a really great hour of work. There's a real service. Again, it's the same exact pattern. Love leading you to willingly embrace a present challenge. But then it can describe a whole project you're working on. It can describe a whole way of life that has a sense of mission to it. So there's this beauty that there's something fractal-like about that. But it's also the same when it comes to people trapped with anxiety, for instance, that they are hyper-focused on threats and desperately trying to escape them and feeling more anxious. And that hyper-focus can describe a moment, an hour, a week, or longer. So it's the same kind of thing, that there's these patterns that we see, and that's the richness of human behavior and why it's actually susceptible to being described by advanced math like chaos theory.
So, Kevin, why is there this sometimes slipping back, the backsliding that we see? I mean, how does that fit in? Because you mentioned, virtuous cycles, vicious cycles. So I mean, you might think, okay, if I just practice this loving way of approaching every little thing, and then the hour, and then my week becomes this way of lovingly, willingly embracing challenges, that, okay, then I just develop all these virtuous cycles and things are great. So how does it go wrong?
Yeah, and this has to do with the idea that even when we're in the vital valley, and that's where we typically live, we will always face saddle moments. There will be saddle moments where we could tip either way. We can get better and better at tipping right back into vitality. But vitality requires a constant, deliberate choice. It doesn't happen automatically. There's always a tendency in us to avoid discomfort and dynorphins. And vitality thrives on dynorphins. Vitality essentially is what happens when you willingly embrace something that gives you the dynorphin signal, and then you get the bounce of dopamine after, and you get energized by it. It's called opponent process theory. That's actually the real mechanism in vitality. So vitality requires that there are things that are kind of challenging, that stretch us, that are difficult. And we always tend towards comfort. But the more we tend away from really willingly embracing with love that stretch, the more we're actually moving toward a saddle. And the easier it can be for us to slip into a valley. We can roll the other direction, as we put it. And that actually is something that if people are not actively working with willingness, especially with real good, solid motives of love and service, they're much more at risk then to being surprised by backsliding. And they can be surprised that, wow, this habit I thought was gone, it could return really fast, but there was a loss of good momentum going on for a while, and then gradually they fell back into something. I think that this is our way of trying to help describe that we can, we always need practice at saddle points to learn to choose again willingness. And if we go with unwillingness to feel adrenaline, to feel adenosine, or just to feel dynorphins in themselves, we will fall then into these vicious cycles again. Yeah, and we get kind of pulled back. And so what happens then is once you start giving in to, say with anxiety, once you start giving in to avoidance, the normal thing of avoidance and anxiety is some form of reassurance seeking. You have a worry and you try to reassure yourself, but it wears off and you're left with more anxiety and you worry more and then you try to reassure yourself. The more you repeat that loop, it's like a kind of vortex is created in the mind. Meaning and effort and attention are synchronized, but in anxiety mode. And that creates the sense that it kind of pulls you in more and more. And then the more desperately you try. So for instance, as an example, imagine that a parent gets a text from their son's in college, and they get a text from a college administrator saying, "We have to talk soon. Are you available?" That's totally ambiguous text. And you're like, oh man, what's going on? But maybe they didn't see it, for 20 minutes. So they text back yes and no response. They try calling, they don't pick up. They're now thinking all the possible things that could be going wrong with their son in college. Like, what is happening? I hope something bad hasn't happened. Has he gotten in trouble? I hope he's not hurt. You can imagine that now they're like bouncing through all of these threats, really an unlimited number of threats. That very sense that like the possible things that could be wrong are like infinite drives them to then try to reassure themselves, to call more. Maybe they try calling their son, he doesn't pick up. And now they're really spiraling in anxiety. It can happen really fast. All right. So what can we say then to a person who has gotten caught in one of these vortexes of anxiety? Um, and that's what I wanted to show here is that you always have freedom to change the pattern. That what you do in a moment has a ripple effect that gets stronger and stronger. So even if you're in the bottom of some anxiety vortex and you feel like you're just going deeper and deeper into it, at that moment, you can reverse the engines. And you do that with love and willingness and putting your attention fully into the present moment. Right? Now, the attention, I think of anxiety as being primarily this kind of, the attractor is actually in the cortex. It's these infinite threats, the unlimited, catastrophes that could happen. That and all the consequences, that's where that has this own like gravitational pull, or what I've called in the past, a negative trance. It's totally entrancing to start getting caught by thinking of threats. And that trance pulls them in, and then if they're unwilling to experience the anxiety, they try to reassure themselves or do something to escape it. And that only makes it worse and confirms the threat mode and the anxiety. But if you flip these around, you can actually use the anxiety itself, the signal, the feeling you have, as where to place your attention that's in the present moment. And so that gets you out of the infinite possibilities to the finite feeling of tension in the chest. And then you can willingly open up to engage that. And then especially you can try to shift to how could this moment of me embracing the feeling be an expression of love? Yeah. If this moment could be a gift, like the growth I have in this moment, the peace and clarity that eventually I'll have as I grow in this, how can I make this moment a gift? Yeah. To whom could I offer this moment with love? You try to see how you can then do one loving thing right now in the midst of it. So you can have love and willingness and then present attention in the middle of an anxiety vortex, and it's like a counter spiral that starts to slow down the anxiety vortex to make it less and less deep, and then eventually you find you're on the saddle again. But that can take a while. But even if it takes like a really long time, natural transitions in your day, will be saddle points. No one is ever permanently stuck in the anxiety valley. And then it'll be much easier to practice putting love into willingly embracing the present challenge. Because on a saddle, you can feel it work. You feel the flip in your mind. There's a click and you start to feel good again. Like, okay, now I'm getting the right momentum. And that draws you back into vitality.
Mm-hmm. So, Kevin, one thing you mentioned earlier, which caught my attention, was the idea that all these behaviors have this kind of fractal features, self-similar at different levels. So you have is similar at the level of one action, at the level of an hour of work, at a week, at a life. So it seems like one of your suggestions here, which is pretty radical probably, is that someone in one of these anxiety vortexes, their attention has been captured by threats and adrenaline and all that going on. All they have to do is focus on their one next action.
And that action can be simply to try putting love into willingly embracing the present feeling as a starting point. And then you come to the next good action to do. Okay, to do the next good thing, to be responsible. You start like connecting more to how can I be the most service in this moment of crisis? Let's do this like the parent. Okay, I'm just going to try to be as available as I can. They'll eventually call back, and then we can say that it might have been that that the check didn't go through for tuition, and they're calling about that. It's like, okay, good, it's no big deal. So and then, um, but very often there's the case that the the triggers are not maybe so stark. It's just some kind of ambiguity, or you start to, a parent worries about how their kid is doing. The kid's not talking as much about, the good things at school anymore. And then that can get its a momentum of its own. And then the parent can think, okay, how can I lovingly connect with my child again? And just try to open up any channel of communication. You start to focus on what you can do, but it always will have these elements of love, willingly embracing a challenge in the present moment. Basically, if you do those things, put love into willingly embracing a challenge in a present moment, you can never go wrong. That always works. It will either slow the vortex, and help you to get out of it sooner, or at a saddle point, it'll just create the good momentum, or it will deepen momentum you already have. And as people get better with anxiety, what I try to do in my practice is I try to get the vortex spinning when I'm in the room with them, to really trigger it so that I can teach them how to do this, how to embrace the feeling, right? And then they can see, well, whoa, now they're back on the kind of saddle point. They could go back into the scary feeling, or they could actually, feel like they're moving forward gradually. And so initially, all the practice is in deep vortexes. But as people get better, those, are a little, it's like the slope isn't as steep anymore. They don't fall into it so fast. And then much more of it is about these saddle moments where they could tell they were tipping, and then they learn to tip the other way back to vitality. And then eventually you're working with people and they're just in vitality and deepening it. So this is like the stages of how people typically get better. So the main thing is you have to be patient with doing the right practice. It will feel like it's not working. It'll feel like you're doing the wrong thing if you try to just put love by willingly embracing a present challenge. But it always works. Eventually it will work. And sometimes it's right away. Sometimes it takes time. But, the next morning when you wake up or when you go home from work, you'll be at another saddle point. It'll be 10 times easier to practice the vital move in that setting.
Before we continue, a brief message. If you're benefiting from these discussions, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. Doing so helps us to reach more people. So you're not just learning, you're also helping others to discover a path of growth and flourishing. Thanks for your support. So, Kevin, what kind of reaction do you get when you give this approach or this explanation to people that, okay, it's just about the next action? Because people, come with anxiety, this big thing hanging over them, and then you just say, well, it's just the next moment, just put love into it. Are they like overjoyed, or are they surprised, can't believe it, or does it actually seem very difficult to do that, or how do people respond?
I feel like I've almost never had so many home runs and talking to people as with these ideas, and people saying that exactly describes my situation. And again, it's like, patient after patient, people saying that exactly describes what happens, and you'll work with people and they can make enormous progress, but sometimes that progress, like they worry that it's fragile. Like, can I fall right back into it? And the idea is, even if you did, it's the same movement of practice, and you'll get stronger by practicing it in that situation. The other thing that's really like an aha moment is this has helped people to see, wait, I've been using mindfulness or reframing as ways of seeking immediate relief when I'm in that vortex. But the vortex is driven by the need for relief. It's this desperate pursuit of relief from anxiety that drives the vortex, right? That's what gives it its energy. It's essentially, how unwilling are you to experience the anxiety? How desperately do you want relief? That's what drives it. And they can see it. I can tell. I just had someone tell me this the other day. I feel like now I completely understand that I was doing it exactly wrong without intending to. I was actually just seeking relief rather than being with the feeling and then seeing that I can make that an offering of love in some way. So it's beautiful to see.
Yeah, and I think it's very powerful too that the same path of how you get out of the vortex is also the same path for how you continually grow and make yourself resilient. One question I get a lot from students is, okay, early on in the semester, the quarter, things go well. I'm just starting classes, and I can get to bed on time. I can get up early. I can actually I feel good. But then when final exams come, it's like a mess. So, and I always kind of feel like I relapse into that. So, what you're saying here is also going to help people stay resilient, even if their circumstances shift or they encounter a more difficult time at work or school or whatever.
Yeah, because I think fundamentally that the what creates a vortex is a synchronizing of the three engines. And when those engines synchronize, there's different patterns of synchronizing. And you have vitality, and which is like the healthy pattern, and then you have the anti-patterns, right? And there's different ways that you can have anti-patterns, three main ones, but vitality is one pattern. And so no matter which of those three you're in, you don't even have to fully diagnose it. The simple question is, am I seeking immediate relief from discomfort? And if so, what would it look like to try to willingly embrace that discomfort right now with love? That's the move. It's independent of which valley you're in. Now, the signature move of depression and the signature move of addiction are distinct, mostly from what happens in anxiety, uh, but the fundamental truth is the same. The movement of vitality is still directly opposite it. It's like introducing into a vortex a precisely contrary spin. And sometimes people can experience a very rapid change. But usually that means they were at a saddle point, not in the depth of the vortex. When you're in the depth of the vortex and somehow the bad thing feels infinite, then it takes some courage to try to practice willingness at that moment. And it takes patience for it to start to actually shift things. But it will. It will win. In just I'm thinking of these infinitudes. In anxiety, one of the drivers is that the threats are potentially infinite because they're not real. So they constantly change. So it's like if it was just one threat in your mind, like you're worrying just about purely one thing, you could kind of habituate that more easily. But when they keep rotating and shifting in a chaotic way, if you have at least three things to worry about, it's now suddenly infinite. Right. And so it's like all the ways they can interact. So people end up spiraling. But it's a very different feeling with depression. With depression, what feels infinite is the perceived effort. That somehow it's going to the subjective cost of doing this activity, is either blown into infinity because the perceived effort is endless. It's like, oh, I just don't have all the energy I would take. Or somehow the reward is minuscule. So it's like, it ends up being like dividing by zero. So it's like a kind of infinity. So that's a striatal phenomenon. Yeah. And the center of gravity in depression is a striatal issue that's now driving it. Effort feels futile. So the thinking is like justifying why effort is futile. And then of course the septum is kind of resonating with sadness and heaviness. There's just a sense of heaviness there. And then so people withdraw. That's the urge. They do it to get relief from
This is for addiction.
Yeah, this is depression.
Oh,
Yeah.
depression. Oh,
So
okay, sorry.
people who are depressed, like when they feel like, oh, that it's so heavy and this is going to take so much effort, I'm just not going to do it. They withdraw in order to get relief. But again, that pursuit of relief is what drives the vortex. Or maybe in depression, it's more like a sinkhole. It's something that's sucking them down. And they slide deeper and deeper into it. It gets heavier and heavier. But even then, focus your attention on just the next small action. Rouse all the love you can to do it with some kind of sense of service and meaning. So you try to embrace willingly just the next finite quantum of effort I'm going to put into this thing. And if there's tiredness, I'm going to welcome it because it's worth it to do it to serve or to love this person. You build it one little step at a time. That's the contrary movement of vitality, putting love into some, next step of a present challenge. And that's how people start to generate a contrary momentum. It doesn't work all at once, but it does work. And it will work progressively more and more. And then eventually they'll notice every once in a while they're at a saddle point, and if they do it, they get this second wind of vitality. It's like, whoa. So for depressed people especially, how they start the day, how they start their work day, what do they first do when they get home, areas where they could be giving in to effort withdrawal, that's where they try to put love into one thing next.
So yes, I guess as you were describing it, I'm picturing someone in a basin, and it's like, instead of letting themselves slide into the deepest part of it, they have to climb up a little bit, and it requires effort.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not
Yeah,
just like one climb or one good vital action is gonna automatically send you into vitality. You have to keep climbing until you
exactly.
get to the saddle point, and then the next one will tip you over into the valley, the vital valley or whatever.
Yeah. And so it might feel when they're in the depth of the sinkhole of depression that everything is heavy. It's better exercise. If you can welcome adenosine when it's being magnified so much by the sinkhole effect, if you can welcome it then, it'll be easy to welcome it when you're at a saddle. So you're making your wake up time next morning easier by learning to just embrace the heaviness of that adenosine feeling right now. What you're actually starting to do is even shift how much it gets amplified. There's a lot going on when you're doing these things, but the point is that love and willingness and attention that is just anchored in the present moment, that is the solution. And again, just like with anxiety, it's attending to the signal that becomes the anchor. That becomes what is the basis then of doing the vital movement. It's the same with depression. Adenosine is that heavy feeling. When the dynorphins are attached to it, it's so heavy, right? And all effort feels kind of futile. That is what you're saying yes to. The feeling of the futility of effort, the feeling of the heaviness. You're learning to embrace it totally, right? And that in itself, when you willingly engage it, you will get a second wind eventually. It can take a while, but it gets stronger and stronger the more you learn to practice it. So any practice done at the depth of the vortex or sinkhole, that's incredibly good. You're building the right muscles. You're doing it without relying on immediate feedback. And that just makes you master it more and more. But that just means that next time you're at a saddle, which will happen in the next 24 hours, at some point you're back at a saddle. Then when you do it, you actually feel the payoff right away as you start going right into vitality. So there's so much, it takes patience and it takes persisting in this vital movement, even when it feels unrewarding in the moment. It only feels super rewarding at saddle points, but eventually you'll get there.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, maybe last we could cover addiction, because we've talked about the infinity involved in anxiety and in depression and the signature move there and what the flip looks like. So maybe just to round out the picture, clarifying for addiction as well.
Yeah, so I think that in addiction, people have a craving that they are unwilling to experience, right? And they will seek relief from it, from the dysphoria of it, with some kind of cheap dopamine to balance it out. I think of addictions as kind of a phobia of dynorphins themselves. Dynorphins, when they're high, produce a very strong sense of restlessness, and of what's called dysphoria. It's a bad mood, irritability, the gnawing feeling, of a craving. Okay. The infinitude in addiction is that the craving feels like it will be permanent, like it will last forever. Now, just as with anxiety, the threats are not actually infinite. And with depression, the effort is not actually infinite. Here in cravings, the effort or the craving is not going to be of infinite duration, right? It's not going to last forever. But in the moment of a temptation, it feels like it's going to go on and on and on. And so their unwillingness to feel it is what sets them up to seek relief by giving in. Giving in is how they get cheap dopamine that will counteract the dysphoria of dynorphins. That cheap dopamine lifts them up briefly, but there will always be another crash. And then they're going to feel even worse. The dysphoria will be greater. And that can set them up for giving in again. So people can get stuck in this cycle of desperately looking for relief with cheap dopamine whenever they have discomfort. And that's the signature move of addiction. Now, that actually describes many, many ways of acting besides pure addiction. So this is like addiction very broadly considered, but it certainly applies to all the main serious addictions that have been studied. This is an exact mechanism. So what's the solution? Well, again, you have to somehow turn that infinite thing into the finite object of present attention so that you can willingly embrace it, ultimately with a motive of love. And so here it's like, how can I lovingly embrace the craving itself, right? Willingly feeling the craving, being willing that it lasts as long as it is to last, because I'm committing myself and my life to some higher cause, to some actual path of serving true goods, not the kind of false beloved of the addiction. So addiction is all about the meaning engine becoming the center of gravity, but in the wrong way. That's where the craving is felt. The affective resonance of the craving that they're so unwilling to experience, that's a septal phenomenon, right? And so the meaning engine here is driving the other two. The cortex and the striatum are kind of along for the ride. The cortex is typically planning the next use. The striatum, when the opportunity is there, kicks into automatically doing it. So you have automation and you have kind of rumination and planning. But the real driver there is the craving that they're unwilling to experience. That's like, sometimes I feel like sometimes people describe it like a vortex, but very often it's also like a trap door that they just fall through. So they were walking along and then before they knew it, they just fell through the trap door. Whatever it is, there's like a chute going down. It's like a tunnel or a chute. But even then, if you can put love willingly into embracing the present challenge, which is the craving, you will start to reverse the magnetic pole of it. And then gradually you'll back at the saddle. And then you can say yes more and more eagerly to some motive of love.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful, Kevin. Well, we're basically out of time, but I just have one last question, which we touched on a little bit already. But so we've covered, the three valleys and the vortexes. I don't know if that's the plural, but of addiction, depression, anxiety, and it seems like, yeah, just to think about, sometimes people are in periods where I gave the example earlier of a college student, in the early part of the semester and things seem to be going all right and they're going fine. How do they, and it's just the same thing of, how do they make themselves, how do they like, kind of make themselves resilient to the falling back into these things? Like, how do they keep up the pace of growth? And I gather it's just like they have to keep the gas pedal down. They can't give up. Otherwise, they're more likely to backslide, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So putting it this way, you're thinking in terms of opponent process. I haven't like mapped it out exactly, but with anxiety and depression and addiction, it's dynorphin, dynorphin, dynorphin. In one case, joined to adrenaline, in the other joined to adenosine, and the other in itself. But the point is that when people are like having that dysphoric feeling, which is what happens when you're in a valley, and they seek relief with some kind of escape or withdrawal or cheap dopamine, then they crash and it's even deeper. What happens with vitality is exactly the opposite. If they are willing to experience the dynorphins and lean into the dynorphin experience, they will have the bounce of dopamine after that's going to carry them through. That's where the energy comes from. So you can't, so if you think about it, you can't think of vitality as simply constant static high mood, like high dopamine level. The way you maintain dopamine at a high level is by continually embracing little signals of dynorphin that come up. So to willingly embrace some kind of stretch, finding ways of stretching yourself, finding ways of testing yourself, finding little ways of making things harder or denying yourself, that is the essence actually of vitality. You have to have this athletic sense of constantly working out a little bit. And there's, and so anything that could make you feel like your patience is being tested a bit, that sense of impatience is the dynorphin signal. And so that is what vitality feeds on. That's how it grows stronger and stronger. Not ever overdoing it, not doing it in crazy ways, but saying yes in little sacrifices, in little hardships that are cheerfully embraced. That's actually the way you keep in shape.
Love it. Well, Kevin, this is great.
Well, Sharif, thank you for your questions here. These are,
of course,
there's a lot of moving parts. It's sometimes hard to keep it straight. So I think
it's very chaotic.
it's
Good.
very chaotic, but I think we're trying to bring a higher order out of it.
Yeah, that's right. Awesome. Well, we'll be back. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and you're looking for more in-depth guidance, check out OptimalWork.com, our unique platform that delivers content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond.